viral factor of the 3-minute version was off the fucking chain, off the charts as far as if people would watch the 3-minute version, they would send it to every friend they had. Like, they would get so lit up by it. They wouldn't, like, so that's the version that, like, at first MoveOn was like, no, we're not doing anything but a 90-second version. I was like, fuck you guys, it's such a great action. Like, we're definitely doing the 3-minute version, and you guys can do it or not. But then when they tested it, they were like, oh, we're going to set up the 3-minute version.
The target one grabs you, and you're almost forced to watch the rest of it.
Yeah.
It keeps you engaged.
Right. Because it's the production. The production value. So I mean, we had 7 cameras. I think we had 2 professional sound guys. Yeah. We had microphones on boom. So did you see the aerial shot as we were leaving the place? Like, the guy had a 15-foot boom, and he held his camera up, and got, I mean, it's just nuts. So.
It's also a measure of audience. There are going to be people who want to watch 25-minute videos, right? They want to learn. But the thing is, first you have to hook.
Right.
Yeah. So you want to have, the combination. You want to be able to hook people in with your soundbite culture that we're forced to sort of play around with. That John's saying is it's so unfortunate that people have been reduced to 90 seconds. Yeah. It is unfortunate, but if you can use that to hook them in, then you can sort of unpackage the Trojan horse of information if they're able to or willing to or interested enough at that point to get informed and so they'll watch more and longer things after that.
Yeah. And I just invite people to think about engaging in information warfare. Not having to feel like you need to unpack all the facts, but to actually intervene with their story. And tell a different, more powerful story. Create a frame that's more powerful that has their frame within it. I'll just talk about some defining questions that I ask myself when I'm doing an action that need to get answered because that was what was requested of me. So the first question that I ask is, what is the campaign objective? What is the moment that we're speaking to, and what are we trying to do in this action? A lot of times, hopefully you guys will have great discussions about, grand strategy and tactics and vision. You should have a vision for your campaign. That's kind of the highest level, mission being under vision, and then strategy being under those things. And you can't accomplish a strategy in an action. Your action, I think the most important thing is to kind of, what I try to do is to say, what does victory look like? Both for the campaign, what does the victory of my campaign look like, and then how do I reverse engineer that through different actions and tactics? How do I get there to what victory looks like? But you can also do it in an action, which is a tactic. An action is tactical; it's not strategic, and it's to achieve something concrete. And so, what is that? What's the victory? What were we trying to achieve in the Target action? We were trying to, use Target's brand in this critical moment when they're dumping Citizens United dirty money into this race in Minnesota, being the first giant corporation out of the blocks to use Citizens United to poison our democracy. We're going to fucking make an example of that, with some pop culture. And so, so we decided that. So then, I don't know, what Depeche Mode song comes to my mind when, people are people and Target ain't people or whatever, so it just kind of, so it starts to percolate, and I all of a sudden was rewriting a Depeche Mode song. And so, so I think it's really important to ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve? So many times we go up half-cocked, these fuckers, we got to do an action. We got to do an action today because these guys, so, what are you trying to get? Is it appropriate to take action? What kind of action will be appropriate? How will it be perceived by the public, by our allies, by key members of the community? Are you from outside of the community and you're going to do some giant fuck the cops action and then leave and let the community continue to get preyed upon by the cops who are like the occupying army in their neighborhoods? Are we prepared to do necessary follow-up? What are the potential targets for our action? Who is the audience of our action? And this is probably multiple audiences, right? There's, hopefully somebody will do kind of an allies and adversaries power analysis. You're going to do that? Cool. So, in the strategy, the long-term strategy of a campaign, you're trying to, move a spectrum of allies and adversaries to the left, right? You're trying to neutralize key opponents and make them sort of passive opponents. You're trying to take passive opponents and get them to sit on the fence. You're trying to get fence sitters to be passive allies. You're trying to get your passive allies to become active allies. You're trying to get your active allies to become radical, right? That's our job, is to shift the whole frame left. Something that Republicans and the Tea Party understand so well, So we just published this book called Beautiful Trouble. And it's got a website, beautifultrouble.org. Check it out. It's some of the most amazing practitioners of creative action, us and the Yes Men, and some amazing folks from all kinds of different movements wrote this book. And there's a great chapter on this concept called the Overton window, which Glenn Beck loves. The Overton window. The Overton window is the frame that shapes the frame itself. And by skewing the Overton window right or left, you create a new frame. You pull the frame over in a direction that creates new possibilities for you, whether you're a conservative or a new reality in the debate.
This is in that book?
What was the name of the book?
The book is called Beautiful Trouble, and the website is beautifultrouble.org. So who is your audience? You have a primary audience like the public, or maybe you have a smaller audience. It's Congress, or who. But you probably have multiple audiences. And where do you want to move the audience? Where do you want to? How do you want them to understand this? What kind of story do you want to tell them? Where do you want to move them to in this action? And based on that, what is your message to them? And how can you utilize the media to tell this message? If you don't have access, still, I feel like you still have to use the master's tools to tear down the master's house. I love making my own media, right? And I love building a pipe directly to the public, but, I still have to design actions that are going to actually be simple enough and powerful enough to be able to shoot through the filter that is the corporate media, that is CNN and NBC and ABC and all those scumbags, and still come out, that forces them, if they're going to cover me at all, to tell it in a powerful way. So how can we utilize the media? What is our timeline? What is our budget? And what resources do we have to do this action? So you're going to use appropriate technology, and you got to know what what ingredients you have before you start cooking. You can't cook paella if you don't have saffron. It just doesn't happen. So you got to cook with what you have. You can't go to war with the army that you want. You have to go. No, I'm not going to here. What legal issues will this raise? This is a really important one. I've ended up doing some crazy felonies that that our lawyers just didn't know were there, and even though they did, they didn't look hard enough. They didn't think about these things. So what legal issues will this raise, and how can we limit our legal exposure, and how can we get ourselves some good legal advice and support? And then my litmus test is, does it resonate with Gail and Frank? Those are my parents. They're here actually on the island this week, and they're really kind of my dad was like a Reagan Democrat. Worked in a tire factory, was a union guy. My mom's a school teacher. They're pretty radical now, but for a while they were pretty mainstream, and it was a great way to test messages with them, and kind of the frame with them. So I think I have 5 minutes left, so I'd love to just open it up to questions, comments, criticisms, whatever you like. Yes.
When talking about sort of like messaging and strategy, I often find that there's this sort of like ends of like getting your message out there, right? Which like justifies like a whole bunch of means, right? Which have the potential to like alienate a whole bunch of people, like asking people to change how they dress, asking them to change how they act, to engage in these political actions. And then there's like a, sort of like sense of victory of like, and then this news station covered it, and then it changed for a week or 2 days the dialogue around X issue, and then that's the like thing, right? Like, oh, we did it, you know? And it always seems like that's the end logic. When I sort of like am exposed to what you just showed for like an hour, you know, which are great things. But I don't often hear the, you know, and then the policy changed, and then the you know, whatever. Like, I'm not exactly clear on the link between a really like fantastical, beautiful media strategy, you know, and actual political efficacy. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
It's a great question, and I think oftentimes actions do become about how much media did I get, right? How many TV stations was I on? You know, the clippings. I tried. Maybe I did a terrible job. I probably did in talking about, you know, the Lakota won, the drift net action won, the factory trawler stuff in a lot of ways was created a really important, you know, battle around control, you know, strip mining the oceans up and around Alaska. There's a lot of, you know, I think in my experience, and it's not always the media at all, but in my experience, direct action is one of the most powerful tools in our toolbox, and it can create what I would almost call magical results when you stand up and take action and cross that line and decide to, you know, obey a higher moral authority and disobey unjust laws or just laws that are, you know, in the way. So I think, but I do think often we let actions become about media because they are so good at seizing a media moment and oftentimes seizing a media moment can change the dialogue and at a critical time and create political pressure. But for me, winning campaigns is all about winning hearts and minds and creating political will to change behavior or to confront injustice at some level. And so one of the most powerful ways that consciousness gets changed is through media. Yeah.
Can I add to that too? I think one thing that happens is we forget our own stories, and we start to remember the campaigns and the actions based on the news coverage that we got in the videos that we made. And sometimes we summarize our campaign victories or the actions we worked on, which is showing the direct actions or just showing the news clips, and not talking about the hundreds of others of steps and all the different types of direct actions we did that didn't need media or take media to create the leverage we got to get us to the bigger spectacle. So sometimes I think it's about us forgetting to step back and tell or not always having the time to tell the whole story of all the different actions that went into that one moment that got us maybe the bigger media hit also. And so maybe that's, so I also think it's never just the good media action that saves the day, you know, but but sometimes it's something that tips the
scales.
Thank you, I can't find words.
This is probably going to be our last comment because I see people running around getting ready for next workshops. Yeah.
Do you think it's more powerful to do an action where you're working towards what you want rather than fighting against something, or? Good
question. I think it's often a lot harder to craft those positive actions that are, you know, there's some great examples of, you know, kind of in the bank stuff. There's some really cool things around creating a library inside a bank or creating a daycare center inside a bank. I like interventions that have conflict to them, and so I think it takes a lot more creativity to create conflict with a powerful, you know, positive, you know, us embodying the solutions that we want and creating conflict by embodying those solutions.
Why do we need conflict?
Because there's a story.
I mean, if a bunch of people understand and say, "Oh, God, that's a beautiful thing you're doing" and stuff, and the people understand, then they're more likely to get involved.
So you can I do
Sure. I mean, everybody can jump in. Well, one thing, I mean, tried to show some of those beautiful people actions on when people are creating, you know, an image, a Picasso line drawing on the beach, or the, you know, tax of 1%. Right. There are, I think, sort of different action medium that lend themselves much more to powerful, positive stuff. Right. But I do think that a great story almost always has some sort of conflict and resolution.
Right.
And because we're up against so much evil that is controlling the story and the world and everything else, that we have to. I mean, we have to build the alternative reality that we want, but we have to tear down the institutions that are in our way. There's just no other choice.
I was just gonna say, typically we have a scale of like, cooperation when possible, exchange, like collaboration when possible with our adversaries, right? Exchange, if that's not possible.